From years of anxiety to warrior and mentor, Bradley Robinson created the Anxiety Project to help you end your anxiety naturally. Let's mold the new you and let's end anxiety together.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Anxiety Project podcast. I'm so excited to be here with you today on episode 287. We're talking about agreeableness. We're talking about being overly compassionate, thinking about other people more than you're thinking about yourself. You're letting other people step over your own boundaries and you're losing self-respect. You're being overly compassionate. This was me. I have some stories today that happened to me in my past where I felt like, I bit my tongue when I should have said something. And as a consequence of biting my tongue, I was left with this bitterness and resentment towards that other person, but also I lost a lot of my self-respect. Really, I lost a lot of that. So we're diving into that today, and I'm going to give you some strategies you can do to help you develop this more assertive side, this monstrous side that you have under control. Because imagine you biting your tongue about all of these, you're being tyrannized at work and other people are taking advantage of you because it only takes 3 seconds within meeting someone, whether or not they can take advantage of you or not, if they're inclined to do so. And what happens is, well, you let it happen. You don't have boundaries. You don't speak up. You don't say no. And then as a consequence, you blow up later on in your life. And the monster side comes out. And you can't control it at that point. So we're talking about how you can develop this assertive side so that you can you can prevent other people from walking on you in the future. And you can say something and, it'll work out way better for you. And so let's dive into it. And to be overly agreeable and compassionate is for the sake of being accepted and liked by other people. You become what others want you to be. You become what others want you to be because that's what you believe. It's I want to be perceived in a certain light. That is naive. That is naive because people will notice within you, well, you're just agreeing because you just want to be liked. So, but if you don't know, if you're unsure of the topic, just say that because that's truth, right? I'm not sure. What are you talking about? Where did you get your information from? I don't know much about this. Why does this interest you? But instead of me asking that, I remember back when I was in my placement after college, just being overly intimidated by other people, adults, and like when I went out into the workforce, I'm being overly agreeable, and like I knew people could see that. But I just wasn't being honest. And people want honesty because it just shows that, you know what, you're willing to be humble. Humility is so, so important. Humility is truth. You're just a slave, right? If you're overly agreeable, hey, I'm just agreeing with everything that you say. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. No, you're being a slave. You are no longer your unique self, but whatever they want you to be or whatever you think they want you to be. And people don't really want you to be that way. That's the funny thing, is they don't want you to be that way because you're easily bendable. There's no structure. You can be twisted and turned in all sorts of different ways. People know within 3 seconds whether they can manipulate you, take advantage of you if they're inclined to do so. And so there's a fear involved in these overly agreeable people of being harshly judged, not being accepted in the group. Is this a biological kind of evolution thing? Well, yeah, I think it's part of it, but definitely a part of it. But, I also think that it's being an outcast, definitely, but really, why? Yeah, it's an evolution thing because being an outcast kind of means being separated from the tribe, not fitting in and starving, and because human beings can't survive on their own. They just can't. They need a tribe because life is too damn complicated and dangerous. You can't survive on your own. And I think that's part of it. Absolutely. But also, there's no self-respect in the sense that these people put all their trust in other people. They put all their trust in other people. And so their value system isn't based in truth, but they're easily swayed by culture, people, newspapers, news. Someone says something interesting to you and you kind of repeat it back to someone else. You take it with all the grains of salt. But really, what you should do is take it with a small grain of salt and question them rather than take it and say it to someone else just for the sake of, look what I have to say, the attention of that, please accept me. And there's a book called The Courage to Be Disliked. I haven't read the book, but I always remember the title, and I think it's so true. Just it's okay to be disliked, other people not to like you. I listening to Goggins, really shifted how I perceive myself. It's like, why are you desperately trying to fit in? Well, who cares if and there's some sort of pride in going against the grain, because really culture is not your friend. Culture doesn't have your best interest in mind. And so when you go out in the world thinking everyone is good, everyone has my best interest in mind, these companies, these food companies and doctors, they have my best. Wait a second. Once you start to look behind the veil, you will find that that is not true. There's malevolence. There's capitalism at play. There's a lot of things happening here. Do you think the pharmaceutical companies want you to eat a very strict and whole foods diet? Of course not. That's why they promote Cheerios as being healthy. Yeah, right, really. So that's interesting, right? I want to talk about though my a previous experience of being overly agreeable, biting my tongue, and it was at my old job. I was working at a delivery job, and my boss was really close to me, right? And he was getting something out of this cabinet, and he was sick, and he was coughing and sneezing, and I was less than a foot from him. It was in this very tight office, and I didn't say anything. He was coughing without covering himself up right in my face, and I didn't say anything. And I left there. I'm like, Brad, you idiot. You idiot. Why didn't you say anything? I was so angry. I could have just said, should I have burst out in anger and yelled at him? No, because that would mean that I don't have my emotions and my aggression under control. What is appropriate is say, hey, why are you coughing in my face? You're sick, aren't you? Why don't you cover up? I don't want to get sick. Just saying something like that. Very appropriate. Fine. It's fine to do so. What am I afraid of? Getting fired? Why would anybody get fired for saying something like that? And if they do fire you, then it's actually good for you because you don't have to work for dimwits anymore. But but as a consequence of biting my tongue, what happened? I would remember this moment for years. That's a consequence. Is it worth selling your soul for this kind of hypothetical idea of, I might get fired? No, it's definitely not, because at home, you're generating resentment and bitterness towards the person that walked over you or did something that you don't agree with and not speaking up. And then what happens is, you lose self-respect and the anger grows, the resentment grows. And then what happens if you let that happen many times, dozens of times? The monster gets uncontrollable and it will come out in a very nasty way eventually. It will come out in a very nasty way. So that regret is a consequence of selling a part of my soul, being a slave to the fear, not trusting in yourself, myself, to do something. And then there's a great question I had to put in this podcast, which is, what if I speak up and I turn out to be wrong? Most likely that's not going to be the case. It depends, right? Because what do you mean by speak up? Like, do you feel like you're being tyrannized and you're being lied to? And it's like, yeah, you feel it, you have a feeling about it, you're probably right. But how you approach it is really important, because if you're at work and you're being tyrannized over and you're just bitter about this every day, you're just thinking about this and you're just hating your job, you have to work behind the scenes to prevent that monster from really taking its toll on your family and yourself and other people. So what you do is you get your cover letter and your resume ready. You start to look for another job, because you're going to have to approach your boss, supervisor, whoever is doing this to you. You're going to have to say something. Tell them, "Hey, I feel this about this because I've noticed in certain situations." You have to go home and list off situations that you feel like were totally unacceptable, and you or situations where you're being lied to. You write them down. And I've done this before with other supervisors. I've written stuff down, that things they've said to me and they didn't follow through on. So then you can go back to them eventually and tell them, "Hey, you said this at this time, this date, and then this at this other date, and then this. What's going on? I'm seeing a pattern here." And that's really useful. You have to be prepared. And also be prepared, like, if it's really bad, you're going to have to negotiate something with your boss. Otherwise, you might just have to look for another job, because literally, if you're preparing to do something about this behind the scenes, you're actually going to feel a lot better about yourself, because you're really going to feel like a piece of crap, man. If you're not doing anything, you're just like you're putting all your eggs in one basket. You're just relying on everything on this position. That's not good. That's not good. You have to look elsewhere. And so I want to kind of jump to another situation in my life where I was struggling with social anxiety. This was at the beginning of my recovery. And I remember being socially awkward. I talked about this before on the show, about being at Starbucks and talking to the barista behind the counter and mumbling or stuttering or my voice cracking. I knew I was embarrassed, because I could tell, like, I was just kind of hunched over and trying to be overly agreeable and, nice. And yeah, I felt bad. I walked out of the Starbucks thinking, I can't come back here anymore. There's no way. But there's this other voice that told me, "You're in recovery. You know what to do now. You got to come back here and try it again." Because I knew that you have to face the things that are challenging and difficult continually in order to improve on them. So I was like, yeah, I got to come back here tomorrow to face the same person. Maybe I can do better. So I did. I came back the next day, and like after like 5-6 times, I just got comfortable. I'm like, oh, it was kind of awkward, but I know I'm gonna come back anyway. So whatever. Letting go of that fear requires you to continuously attack the fear. In Groundhog Day, Phil is so like Bill Murray's character. He goes out with Rita, and he's this self-obsessed narcissist who he's just socially annoying. And he goes out with Rita, his coworker. She's a really pretty lady. He kind of, he's thinking, oh, maybe I can get my way with her. And he takes her out multiple times. But she ends up slapping him over and over and over again because he says something stupid. But here's the thing. He's like, I'm living the same day over and over and over again. I can try again the next day. I noticed her reaction. Like, she doesn't like what I say. Tomorrow's another opportunity to get it right. Oh, okay. So he does it again, he tries again, and he doesn't say the thing. He starts to pay attention to the things that she likes, and he starts to repeat the things that she likes back to her. And it's so interesting because he's noticing where he's fumbling and he's improving. And it's this attitude in about life that's so important, is that, well, if you mess up, if you do something embarrassing, like what I did at Starbucks, hey, you got another day to do it again. But it's just, what's your attitude? You're going to avoid it? Well, that's not a good idea, because you're not going to improve on it. You show up again. What else are you going to do? The dragon's just going to grow. You're just going to become more pathetic. Really, you're going to lose all your self-respect eventually. Agreeable people feel the need to speak, like in a conversation with other people. They need to speak right away to avoid awkward silences and to indicate that they are on the same page as them. Well, everything is cool. Everything is cool. And if you aren't sure, if you aren't sure about something someone is talking about and they ask, like, what do you think? And like, say, I don't have much of an opinion because I'm not too familiar with the topic. I can't say because whatever. I'd like to hear more about what you have to say. Why are you interested? Or you say, I'm having a difficult time understanding. Being humble is so crucial. I learned that a lot when I went into the film industry. On the first day on set, I was so bloody nervous. This is part of the reason why I was kind of floating in my 20s. Like, I didn't really want to go and do these jobs because I was so fearful of just showing up on the job and making mistakes and not knowing anything. But when I was going through recovery, I knew what I had to do. So I decided, hey, I'm just going to shoot for the stars. I'm going to be humble. I'm going to show up and go through this horrible, horrible time of learning and developing myself. And so I showed up on set the first day, and what happens? I get yelled at by the other worker, the other camera technician working on set. And I've just felt like, oh, frig, man, here we go. I'm worthless. I'm this and that. It's being humbling. Starting from the first peg is it's rough. There's no other way to describe it. It's rough, but you need to be humble. You have to be patient. You have to learn. You have to actually walk through the muck. You have to walk through the muck. I love talking about assertiveness, especially with my clients, in helping them to develop this inner trust, building on this trust that if you feel it to be the case, because I get so many clients where they're relying on other people to make decisions for them. But what do you feel? Because that's what's really important. And I'll tell you why. Because you're going to have this dual relationship with your conscience, just like in Pinocchio. Pinocchio is a puppet of culture. He doesn't know anything. He's a little boy, naive kid. But he starts to recognize, hey, there's this little cricket here, Jiminy Cricket, JC, Jesus Christ, Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder, right? And he doesn't know really much more than I do. He's kind of spouting off nonsensical language to the blue fairy at the beginning of the movie, and Pinocchio's like, what? I don't get it. It's like, yeah, of course, because they're on the same page. But what happens when Pinocchio goes out into the real world and goes out and encounters malevolence? He gets walked over, he gets manipulated, he gets betrayed, he winds up on Pleasure Island. The coachman is like literally Satan himself, like taking advantage of these little kids, and he stumbles into that. It's one bad thing happens to him after another. But as he's going through all of this, the cricket and him are learning. They're like, okay, they're learning, like, there's people out there that are going to bite you. This world is not like a walk in the park. There's snakes everywhere. And so the cricket and Pinocchio develop themselves as they go on this great adventure. You have to go on this great adventure. You have to go in the world and say, hey, I don't know much. I don't know much, but you have to just walk into it. You have to walk into that job where you're unsure of and you feel scared that you might not do a good job, like me. You just have to go into it, because as you're doing it, you're going to realize, hey, maybe, I'm starting to learn. I'm starting to get better. I'm seeing these 1%, 5%, 10% increases of like skill that I'm kind of manifesting. And then the cricket in you, your conscience in you you start to listen to it more. The conscience starts to say something that, I should say that. And you say it, and, you kind of, you kind of feel like a fool because you say something stupid or you ask a stupid question. And, it's like, is it really stupid? Or is like, no, because if you didn't ask the question, you wouldn't have learned anyways. So I just don't believe in like, is it wrong for me to say something that I believe to be true? And like, no, because you're going to learn something so powerful. You're going to develop, because once you learn the lesson from the question you ask, then you don't need to ask that question again in the future, and it won't be lingering there. You're going to be smarter. And that's the thing, is as Pinocchio goes out into the world and he goes on this great adventure and he gets himself out of very sticky situations, he learns so much. And then eventually he becomes a real boy, because eventually he has to go to the belly of the beast. So as the movie progresses, he gets more into like really difficult binds. And then he gets into the biggest one of all when he has to go to the bottom of the ocean to rescue his father from the belly of the whale. That's Jonah. Right? Because Jonah, he doesn't listen to God. He doesn't listen to his conscience. He avoids responsibility. And then he gets capsized and he gets thrown overboard into the ocean. And he winds up in the belly of the whale. And we all wind up there, because when we're in a situation that we regret, what were my steps that led me into this position that I'm in? And so Jonah is like, yeah, well, I should have done that, and I avoided responsibility, and I went on this boat, and I fled the city, and yeah, I really I did this. And that's humility. That's humility. Yeah, you did that. Oh, good. Now because you're examining this with a fine-tooth comb, you're learning how not to walk into the same situation again in the future. But you have to face the belly of the whale eventually, and we're all going to get there. We're going to be swallowed, and we're going to have to examine the process. Maybe you know what? Maybe we could have avoided being swallowed. And then you and your conscience are kind of picking over like how it all played out. And yeah, you're going to be betrayed at some point. Something's going to happen to you. The rug is going to be pulled out from under you, and you're going to see a side of yourself that you are like shocked. Oh my God, I can't believe I did that. That's what happened when I cheated. It shocked me. I suffered from PTSD. It blew my whole frame of who I thought I was. I thought I was a good person. I was doing whatever, thought I was doing the right thing. It's like, no, nope, definitely not. What happened? Yeah, well, I kind of steered off the path. And when you backtrack, you'll see all the steps, and it's not pretty. It's not pretty. So here are some techniques, strategies that you can do. So if you, like the situation at my work where I felt like, I held my tongue, I didn't say anything, those situations that you feel, I regret, I want you to write what happened out in detail. And then I want you to write out what you would do instead. If you were in the same situation, what would you do instead? So that you can learn, so you can let go of it. Yeah, that's exactly what I'll do. So you can step by step picture yourself doing what you wish you did. And that'll set you up for when it happens again, because it will come across again. So something will happen, and then you'll be ready. It's like, this is what I'll do. Because in the moment, sometimes you get caught up in your anxiety and you don't know what to do. But when you kind of lay out what you would do in that situation, well, you're preparing yourself for the dragon. And it takes that one moment of saying no and meaning it to shift how you perceive yourself. It takes that one moment. I remember one time I went to my manager, and I never used to do this ever in my life. I was always intimidated by supervisors, managers, authority figures. I went to my manager and I told him, no, like, I don't agree with this. I'm not like angry, or I'm not throwing a 2-year-old hissy fit. I'm saying I don't agree with this. And I'm just being stern and straightforward and speaking my truth. And that's how you let go of all of this resentment. Really, you have to say something. Try and solve the problem, because the problem's never going to be solved if you're just not saying anything. It's just going to accumulate in yourself. You're going to end up hating your job. Maybe your job can get a lot better if you say something. Wouldn't that be great? It's, as Peterson says, telling the truth is the adventure of your life. See what happens. Tell the truth. Whatever you believe to be true, tell it. And if you tell it and it seems evidently wrong, then great, you learned another lesson, and then you won't say it ever again. Or you will adjust your perceptions and values. This is this co-relationship between you and your conscience. You're going to learn as you go forward. And another thing about agreeable people is a lot of the time they're like glassy-eyed, wide-eyed people. And, harnessing that monster generates a more stern, serious face. In The Lion King, when Simba really starts to take on responsibility and he's not so naive and he's not on Pleasure Island with Timon and Pumbaa, he starts to take on like Pinocchio leaving Pleasure Island, because he's like, hell no, I'm not staying here, man. All these people are turning into jackasses, which is so great because they are, right? Lampwick is like turning into a full jackass, and Pinocchio catches it, right? Because he's growing a tail and ears, and he's like, oh my God, he looks in the mirror, he's awake. A lot of people aren't awake. A lot of people remain in this unconscious state, and they end up being not fully functioning, but like, incompetent jackasses when they're 50, and they don't grow out of their kind of teenage years, and they remain teenagers for the rest of their lives. Those people. But yeah, it's, you have to, you get hardened. Your face gets hardened the more you awake to the fact that, hey man, at least I know what I'm doing. At least I'm agreeable. I need to change. That's the first big step of all of this, is noticing the steps where you went wrong in your past, writing them out, and what you would do differently. And also, when you look at people, socially anxious people don't want to look into other people's eyes, but I recommend that you look into other people's eyes and you have a stern and strict face, like you're really paying attention, a very attentive face. How your eyes are sort of half shut and you're just like this. If you're watching, you're like, that's why I talk to a lot of my clients, is I try and hone in on them, because I don't want to be so internal, because I am an internal dude, but I try and zone in on them and their face and what they have to say. Because much of the time, socially anxious people are thinking about, how are others perceiving me? How are others perceiving me? How are others perceiving me? Do I have food on my face? And that there's no difference between being self-conscious and negative emotion. There's no difference. There's no difference. So try and hone in, watch people, listen to people. It's a practice. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. So do these strategies, okay? Do these strategies. Write out that situation that caused you anxiety, right? And that guilt and shame, that the situation where you sold your soul. And what would you do differently? And, just say no one time. If you have a relative that you're always agreeing with, next time when they come over, if your truth is well different from their truth, then tell them. It takes that one time. And that's where I'm going to leave you today on this podcast episode. Remember to rate. It only takes a moment. This podcast on Spotify. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being a supporter of this show. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this podcast is providing you with much value. Share this with somebody that you know. Maybe you know someone who's overly agreeable. Share it with them. It'll change their life. I'm positive it will. Rise above anxiety. I'll see you next time.
Brad's powerful anxiety recovery program is now available at unpluganxiety.com. The Anxiety Project program is downloadable and puts the power of anxiety recovery in your own hands. Visit unpluganxiety.com for more details. Recovery starts now.